Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to STOCAST Episode 2. Go ahead and grab yourself a cup of coffee. Today I want to talk about ship fatigue. Basically, the idea that there are so many ships in the game already, and every time they add a new ship, there's diminishing returns because there are just so many existing ships that each new one has to compete with for your attention and your money, and it gets harder and harder for them to convince us that a new ship is actually something that we want. And when that's the primary income generator for them, that's a problem. And I wanted to talk about the different ways that they can address that and commend them actually a little bit for how they've handled it, because there's only one way to handle it badly. I think there's only one way to fix that problem that's really bad, and they have chosen not to do it. So I do think that's good, and I hope they choose to continue not to do it. But basically, if a new ship comes out, and you already have 50 ships, like if you have one ship, and then they introduce a new ship, that's pretty exciting, right? Because you've doubled the number of ships that are available, and you're probably going to want it because it's something new. If you already have 50 ships, then they add a new ship, it's going to have to be something pretty significant to really get your attention, because you can't fly 50 ships, right? Not regularly anyway. So you already have ships you're not flying. Even if you just accumulated all the event ships over the years, you would have quite the roster. So how do they talk you into a new ship? Well, like I said, there's only three ways that I can see from my point of view. The first two ways are actually fine. I think they're fine. One way is to rely on outside influence, and basically that just means leaning in on the Star Trek intellectual property. So, you know, if they add the Constitution class, which they did, obviously everyone's going to want that ship. It doesn't matter whether it's any good or not. I mean, the Tier 6 Connie doesn't have to be a good ship. It could be the worst ship in the game, and people would buy it because it's the Connie, right? So as long as Star Trek is continuing to produce new TV shows and movies and stuff like that, there's going to be a demand created outside the game, right? It's something that's being done for them by Star Trek as a wider franchise. It's not something Cryptic has to do. It's sort of free advertising for Cryptic because the hype for these products is generated outside the game. And that's only going to go so far, though. And they do lean on that. They do that because, of course, they do. That's obvious. Every time there's a new hero ship, I mean, hell, if there's a ship that shows up for 2 seconds in the background of one episode, they stick it in a lockbox these days, it feels like. So they definitely lean on that. And then those ships don't have to compete in terms of stats exactly, especially the more prominent they are. If it's a ship flown by, you know, a captain or something like that, then definitely it doesn't have to. It's going to be able to be sold on its own merits just by existing. So that's a way that they can do it. Another way they can do it, you differentiate the new ships from the old ones in some way by making them unique. And one of the best ways they do that, and the birds are chiming in as well. I think they agree with me. Mr. Bird, do you agree with me? No? Anyway, so the best way that they did it, and something I think they should do again, is adding a new specialization, right? Because when they added the Miracle Worker specialization, there was already a lot of ships in the game at that point. And the birds really don't agree with this analysis, and I have to say, I mean, they're right. They have a point. The birds have a point. But anyway, when they added the Miracle Worker specialization, there was already a lot of ships in the game. And those first new Miracle Worker ships, the very first Miracle Worker ships to exist, were exciting. They were enticing. People wanted them because they were unique. There was no other ship in the game that could do what that ship did. Whether it was objectively good or not, whether it was objectively powerful or not compared to other ships was kind of irrelevant. It had something unique that no other ship had, and that made it desirable. And so the more ways they can find to think outside the box, to be creative, and to differentiate ships from all the other ones, That's a way of creating value without the next thing we're going to mention, power creep. And the problem with differentiating ships using creativity is that it's a very old game running on an even older engine. So there is a limit, and it's being run by a skeleton crew. So there is a limit to what they can do. They're not going to be able to give us, you can imagine all sorts of creative things they could do with the ships, but, from a programmatic point of view, from programming point of view, they're not going to be able to make the game do something it can't already do. So it's really just going to have to be variations on what we already have. And so that's why I like the specialization idea and why I think they should introduce a new specialization, a new primary specialization. Because if they add a new specialization, whatever it is, let's just call it Omega. So they add the primary specialization Omega. Now, the very first Omega ship that comes out, well, guess what? Everyone's going to want it. I would want it. I don't care if it's bad or not. It could be a 4-3 escort for all I care. I would buy it immediately. Because it would be the first ship to have those powers. The first ship that would be able to use those new bridge officer powers. It would be unique, it would feel special, and it would generate interest, and it doesn't have to be super powerful in order to do that. So I do think that's a good way to do it. They do both of those things in some regard. But they have thankfully avoided power creep. Now, of course, there's a little bit of power creep in the game. That's number 3. This is the big evil. The one they cannot do is power creep. Power creep will kill certainly the high-end portion of the player base in terms of spending money, the DPS chasers and all that, which I understand is not everyone. But the moment you start diminishing the value of things that people have already bought to a significant degree, it's going to feel pointless to continue purchasing things, because why buy something if it's going to be outdated in 6 months? You want your purchases to continue having value. The Arbiter is still a top-tier ship with a top-tier trait, because Emergency Weapon Cycle is still, all these years later, a super powerful trait, and there really is nothing to supersede it. And that's a good thing, because anyone who bought the Arbiter years ago has been able to hold on to that value, and they can feel like they got value for money. And it makes them more inclined to buy something in the future, because if it's super powerful, they're going to think, well, the last time I bought something super powerful, it's held its value, so maybe this new thing will too. But if you buy something super powerful and then it gets immediately supplanted within a month, or 6 months, or a year, with something just objectively superior in every way, you're going to feel bad. And they have avoided that in large part. So when you consider that this game is 11 years old, the amount of power creep we've had has been pretty minimal. And that's a good thing. And a really cheap, easy way, a short-term way to make money. And I do think this might be an indicator for the end times. How can we tell when the game's getting ready to shut down? Like if they introduce a new ship and it says, while this trait is active, you get 40% bonus damage every time you activate a hull heal. And then a month later, they add a new ship that says you get 50% bonus damage, no activation requirement. And then 2 months after that, they add another one that's 60%, and oh, by the way, it also gives you 5% crit chance. Like, yeah, people are going to buy those. Of course they are, because they're ridiculously powerful. They're more powerful than anything we already have in the game. But as soon as people pick up on that pattern, that in 1 month, something more powerful is going to come out, you're going to stop buying it. You're going to say, what's the point? So I think I've belabored that enough. So in conclusion, those are the 3 main ways, abstractly speaking, that they can get around the problem of ship fatigue. And they can either rely on outside influence, lean in on the Star Trek IP and the hype that's generated outside the game, or they can differentiate them in unique and creative ways, and my preference is for a new specialization, a new primary specialization, or they can just go with power creep, which thankfully they have refrained from in any significant way. And I kind of look at it through that lens every time a new ship is released, and this is the reason why I chose this topic, is because they just announced the second Intel primary Miracle Worker secondary ship in 2 weeks. So there are still plenty of possibilities they can do with what we have now. We could get, for example, mixing ship classes and specializations. We could have more science ships with Miracle Worker primary. We haven't exhausted everything yet, but I just think a new specialization would freshen things up quite a bit. Those first ships would be in high demand just for the novelty, and then after that we can start getting acquainted with all of the different combinations. The new specialization plus Miracle Worker, new specialization plus Command, new specialization plus Temporal, and start getting a feel for what's good and what's not. And we get to go through that whole cycle again, sort of with fresh eyes. And I think that would be really good for the game. So if there's one takeaway from this video, or rather two takeaways from this video, it is Cryptic should refrain from doing power creep, as they have been. So good job, but keep it up. And the second takeaway is I really think we need a new primary specialization to help get past the ship fatigue problem. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. At all the possibilities yet, but oh my god, are you serious? Another fucking airplane. Fucking god. A helicopter right after an airplane? Are you serious?